The Great Lakes Kingdoms. In the Lower Imperial era, the Great Lakes region was the site of the admirable kingdoms and their structure that we will describe. This article will mainly focus on the Buganda and Rwanda kingdoms, the most important of the time. The Kingdom of Buganda. Origins. The origins of this state is attributed to a semi-mythological man named Kinta. Some say he was the first human, which coincides with the birth of modern man in the Great Lakes region. Other reports show him as a warrior who comes from the area to conquer some areas in the north of the Great Lake Nyanza, now Victoria. Kinta could have been the first Kabaka, king of Buganda. Finally, another version says that Chimera, prince of the neighboring kingdom of Bunyoro, was at the beginning of Buganda. All of these accounts tend to say that the Ganda people have always been to the Great Lakes and springs of the Nile and are directly descended from the earliest humans. In the 13th century, Buganda really grew and became the master of the Great Lakes that dominated the Bunyoro. From then on, it extended to an area twice the size of Belgium. Rubaga, the capital of Buganda, at the top of the hill, is a royal concession turn of the 20th century. The organization of Buganda. According to the African matriarchal tradition, the rule of the Kabaka was placed under the protection of his mother by his brothers and sisters of the latter. The Queen Mother bore the title Namasole and enjoyed a great reputation. She had her own palace. Kabaka's sisters seemed just as important. But while the king in Africa was replaced by his sister's son, the Kabaka was replaced by his brother. The monarch was supported by his prime minister, Katikoro, and a royal council, Lukiko, made up of 10 provincial chiefs and dignitaries. On his death, the new king was chosen by the Kotikoro and the Mugenia, chief of the largest clan. The kingdom's economy was based on a very fertile agriculture, thanks to the exceptional fertility of the land of the Great Lakes. The famine there was apparently unknown to the 2 million inhabitants. The provincial chiefs collected taxes and officials were responsible for maintaining the roads leading to the capital. In the 17th century, the Kabaka Kiabazo owned China ware and glasses. Blind Happy from Buganda. He prized the harp that was found all over Africa, including ancient Egypt. British explorer Speke is known for sowing a division in Buganda. He told the king that he came from a people of Ethiopia and that his people came from the descendant of King David of Israel. Speke betrayed the Kabaka and his mother and urged the king to want to convert to Christianity. The same tactic is used in Rwanda and will lead to the 1994 genocide. Speke left as a description of the Kabaka Mutesa at the end of the 19th century. He said, "He, Mutesa, was sitting on a red carpet that lay on a platform, scrupulously dressed in a suit pulled from the bark of a tree. On his neck he had a large pearl ring that was meticulously arranged. On each one he wore rings of brass and copper alternately on his hand and on each foot. Everything was large, clean, and elegant. At his feet were the insignia of the royal family, a spear, a shield, and a white dog. This passage also tells us that the Baganda were skilled metal workers." The army. Canoe trip from Buganda. The defense of the country was particularly demanding. The king managed to rally 125,000 men and 230 boats for battle during the explorer Stanley's visit. The Baganda built canoes that were 25 meters long. The army was defeated by the English settlers in 1894. The Kabaka Mwanga was deposed. He was the last king of the independent Buganda. The Slavic term Uganda, which denotes the kingdom, is adopted by the English to name their colony in the north of Lake Nyanza. Although the kingdom was occupied, it remained strong and deliberate. Mutesa II was the first honorary president of independent Uganda. Buganda rural architecture. The Kingdom of Rwanda. The people of the Banyarwanda trace their origins through the stories of the Tutsi ruling class, the North Africa. Know that God's name is Kuni Rwanda, is Imana, as it was in ancient Egypt, based on some rare similarities with Egypt, notably the headdresses of the elites who mimic the pharaoh's military helmets. We can surmise that the Rwandas have Egyptian origin. It is therefore a people from the north who will rule the land south of Lake Nyanza. The division into boxes under the Manya walls was particularly clear. The nobility carried the title of Tutsi and linked their status with their number of over 8 cows, and their role in the defense of the country. The farmers were Hutu and had fewer than 8 cows. From one year to the next, you could change your status depending on the number of cows you owned. But of course the gods remained Tutsi. These two gods said the same language, the same god, and were under the supervision of the same king. The aristocracy was engaged in poetry and thoughts. The Queen Mother, Nyirarumaga, founded the poetic style of the Rwandan dynasties. The Banyarwanda made it possible to understand the bizarre shape of the pharaoh's military helmet. It actually an African hairstyle. The small circus and helmet of Ramesu Marimana Ramses II represent the frizzy hair that kings at the end. Rwanda later merged with Burundi, making ties between the two entities particularly strong. The Banyarwanda were known for their willingness to go to war, supported by their feared female wrestlers, and for their respect for women. Incidentally, women were strongly discouraged from participating in these violent adventures. According to Yolanda Mukagasana, a war was suspended because a woman among the soldiers was exposed on the battlefield. Mwane King, Yuhi Musinga and the royal family, 1910. Burundi princesses admire their infinite grace. It was the German and Belgian settlers who transformed the concept of Hutu and Tutsi into ethnic groups and gave the Tutsi a complex of superiority such as Spek had to do with Mutesa. That is the root of the Rwandan genocide. Malik Ambar, the African general who became king in India. 4 centuries ago, this Ethiopian enslaved in India rose to the rank of the king by force. He is the greatest black man in the country's medieval history. Malik Ambar. Reproduction of an authentic portrait of the regent's Boston Museum of Fine Arts. In the beginning there was Chapel. Chapel Shembo was born around 1546 in what is now Ethiopia, in the country of Harar. He was enslaved by the Arabs and deported to Yemen and then to Baghdad. Unlike so many young black men who were then put into bondage, he escaped castration and was placed under the supervision of a nobleman named Qazi Hussein. He received a Muslim name Ambar. Impressed by his intelligence, language skills, reflection, and memory skills, Hussein taught him the administration and management of finances. When Qazi Hussein died, Ambar was 22 years old. Then he was sold and sent to India where, like many Ethiopians called Habashi, he arrived at the Genghis Khan's house. Khan was also of Ethiopian descent and was Prime Minister of Ahmadnagar state in southern India. Ambar received military training under Khan. Thanks to these intellectual and physical qualities, he became the most senior Habashi soldier in Ahmadnagar state. Ambar the conquering warrior. After Genghis Khan's death, Ambar formed an army of mercenaries to sell their services to the states in the region. At that time, the Mughals ruled northern India and were constantly trying to expand their rule over the south. Ambar, the head of his army, did such a good job of defending the southern states that his strength was equated with that of a king. So he received the title Malik, which means king in Arabic. He became the main figure in the resistance to the Mughal expansion. Attracted by his prestige and profits, Yaman joined Malik Ambar's army, which was constantly growing. Mughal Emperor Jahangir, whose dream was to kill Ambar but which he could not fulfill, only put his imagination on painting. In 1595, Malik Ambar was integrated with his troops into the national army of Ahmadnagar. The Mughals decided to conquer the country, attacked and circled the capital. The general managed to escape with his men and retook Ahmadnagar. He used the succession disputes in the state to position himself as regent. The Ethiopian warrior married his daughter to a distant alleged heir, who served only as a henchman, and then put a 3-year-old prince with no power on the throne. Through his military authority and cunning, Malik Ambar became the only effective ruler of the Ahmadnagar state. Malik Ambar the builder. The sovereign founded a new capital, Khatki, which is now called Aurangabad. He loved architecture and equipped the city with gates, fortifications, and other imposing and elaborate buildings. In the face of lack of water, Khatki suffered. He then decided to use the underground reserves in the mountains further north. Malik Ambar undertook the gigantic project of building aqueducts that would bring water to the capital and deliver it all year round. Despite the skepticism that was met with the realization of such a project, he completed it in just 15 months and at a low cost. The ingenious water supply system from Nether is the most famous work of the African ruler. The Batkal Gates, built by Malik Ambar. the pavilion of the Malik Ambar mausoleum. The Kingdom of Cuba. Between the 17th and 20th centuries, a sophisticated and beautiful civilization flourished in the Kasai region in the south of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Exploring Cuban civilization is particularly interesting as it escaped the Black Holocaust and has reached the 20th century to be portrayed. As a result, she reflects and makes tangible the stories of the elders about the high level of African civilization before the slave trade. Cuban Yimi Kok Mabinch III, King of Cuba, Congo, photo by Daniel Lane. The birth of the Cuban civilization. At the end of the 17th century, people settled on a particularly fertile soil between the Kasai and the Sankuru rivers, the Cubas, Bakuba in plural, who were settled by conquest. The Cubas pretended to have come from the far north. Because of the similarities between their organization and that of ancient Egypt, African-American researcher and religious William Shepard suggested that they were or could be from Egypt. The tribe that comprised the Kingdom of Cuba were the Bushongos, the Ngindis, Ngongos, the Shoas, the Beings, Ngombes, the Balibas, and the Kams. The multi-ethnic Cuba Kingdom was founded around 1690 under the leadership of the Bushongo tribe. Thanks to its geographical location, which ensured relative isolation, and thanks to its defense mechanism, the Cuban kingdom managed to protect itself from the destruction caused by the European and Arab slave trade and to experience sustainable prosperity. It was not until the total destruction of the Congo by the Belgians at the beginning of the 20th century that it became destabilized. The matriarchs, true rulers, the organization of the Kingdom of Cuba. As in all of Africa, Cuban society was matriarchal, and according to the law, it is the son of the king's sister who took the throne. The eldest woman from the royal family was the true ruler and was able to persuade the king to resign. In the Monomotapa's kingdom, the king was crowned by his mother and married his sister. In the kingdom of Ghana, the king ruled with his mother and sister. The king, as in all of Africa, was the political and religious leader in the tribe of the Cuba. Indirect democracy was used. The elders could guide the king in his rule or even have him killed. This can be linked to the Yoruba tribe, where the king could be ordered to commit suicide if his judgment is unsatisfactory. The royal house in the Kingdom of Cuba consisted of 10,000 members and hundreds of royal wives. The Cubans banned foreigners from entering their country. Whoever broke the law was sentenced to death. The African-American religious, William Shepard, was among the first to be allowed into their territories. This man left his writings on Cuban civilization for posterity. Cuba women. The one on the right makes the famous Cuba cloth. The beauty of the Kingdom of Cuba. This esteemed German historian Leo Frobenius tells us, in 1906, when I entered the area of Kasai Sankuru, I found villages again, the main streets of which were lined with 4 rows of palm trees for several meters of each side, and of which the decorated huts, each of charming manner, also works of art, no man who wore non-precious iron or copper weapons, with a blade with a handle covered with snakeskin. Every cup, every pipe, every spoon was an object of art, worth comparing with the European creations in the Roman style. But all that was only that which was particularly tender and shimmering that adorned a wonderful and ripe fruit. Gestures, manners, the moral canon of a whole people, from the small child to the old man, although they remained within the absolutely natural limits, were shaped by dignity and grace in the princes and wealthy families as with the believers and relatives. As in the neighboring Congo Empire, we were able to find valuable textiles made from plant fibers, raffia, bark, and palm leaves in the Kingdom of Cuba. The Black Kings of Morocco. Until at least the 8th century, the Maghreb was as black as sub-Saharan Africa. The man among this indigenous population contributed to the fame of the region, particularly in Morocco. These hidden parts of black history is a key element to be included in African historical heritage. Memories. In order to understand what is being said here, it is absolutely necessary to collect information about the appearance of white peoples on Earth and settlement steps in North Africa. In summary, the blacks have lived in the Maghreb ever since and represented the majority of the population during Roman and Arab rule. Those who were called Berbers at the beginning were the blacks. Berbers also called Moors and Saracens as the Europeans saw them in Spain and Portugal. All rights high. Moorish royal court in Spain source Jean-Philippe Omotunde for Africa Mart. All right down. Moorish dignitaries playing chess in Spain. Source The Golden Age of the Moor. Edit by Ivan van Septima, page 29. Indeed, it is a slave trade of whites from Europe by the Arab Muslims and a Turkish presence that could have changed the face to the Maghreb to the extent that we know it today. This point has been explained in detail here. According to the BBC, nearly 1,250,000 white Europeans are said to have been enslaved in the Maghreb and Libya between 1530 and 1780. The Black and Arab dynasties of the Idrisids, from 789 to 1000. In connection with the Muslim invasion of Africa, the Arabs entered the Black Continent in 639 and submitted the Maghreb a few decades later. It is an Arab named Idris who founded the first Moroccan dynasty, the Idrisids. He died leaving behind his pregnant Berber spouse, black at the time. She gave birth to Idris II, who extended his father's power to the whole region. It is believed that King Mohammed, the latter's son, also had an African mother. The Idrisid dynasty, mainly African and Arab, was notable for an architectural work in the city of Fez and the expansion of Islam. It went back until it disappeared around the year 1000. It was really the following Almoravid dynasty that made Morocco shine. The Black Almoravid dynasty, 1060-1147. The Christian Spanish King Peter of Aragon, who received the decapitated crowned heads from 4 Moorish rulers of the Almoravid dynasty. We see that the heads are too black. In Western Sahara, King Yahya ibn Ibrahim, who tried to Islamize his subjects, brought back a religious leader named Ibn Yassin, who failed to convert them. Yassin was displaced by the humans and ran to the Senegal River, where he was more successful. In the end, he led a jihad in the region with enough followers and baptized his followers Almoravids, the religious fighters. Abu Bakr, another Almoravid leader, founded an empire that stretched from Morocco to the Senegal River through the war. Abu Bakr, founder of the Almoravid Empire. Spanish illustration, 15th century, Massa Wuladestes. He appointed his cousin Yusuf ibn Taqfin, the regent of the northwest. The latter conquered the former capital Fez and part of Algeria. After Abu Bakr led a jihad that destroyed the powerful vitalist animist empire of Ghana in 1075, he returned to Morocco. There he could only swear allegiance to the confirmed power of his cousin Yusuf ibn Taqfin, who founded the city of the Marrakesh. Taqfin is described on the documents of the time as a brown-skinned and woolly-haired man. The latter responded to the cry for help from blacks and Arabs threatened by Christians in Europe. The Almoravid Empire. Source: Wikipedia. The ruler of Northwest Africa conquered Spain. He founded a gigantic empire that included Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Algeria, Western Sahara, and Mauritania, with Marrakesh as the capital. This black man is one of the greatest conquerors in history from his point of view. Moroccan historiography concludes that with the Almoravid dynasty, the imperial era of Morocco began. In short, even the birth of Morocco. So it was through blacks, Abu Bakr and above all Yusuf ibn Taqfin, who founded imperial Morocco. The Almoravid dynasty was characterized by a monumental work of architecture in Morocco. They were blown away by the Third Almohad dynasty. Architectural treasures of the Almoravid kings in Morocco and Algeria. The Black Almohad dynasty, 1147-1269. The history of this dynasty began with a Masmuda Berber named Ibn Tumat, who was trained in Spain under African rule. The British historian Bernard Lewis reports on the words of the Arab commentator Abu Shama, who called Masmudas black. Ibn Tumat contradicted the Muslim teaching and founded the Almohad movement, that is, unites who rejected Islamists other than Allah. He went so far as to challenge King Ali ibn Yusuf during the public debates in Marrakesh and attack his sister for being exposed. He was considered radical and was banished from Marrakesh. He took refuge among the people and lived in a cave, going out just to preach the oneness of God as he imagined. With enough followers, he waged a war against the Almoravids. After his death, it was his lieutenant Abd al-Mu'min who who put an end to the Takfin dynasty. The Almohad Empire, Wikipedia. The new king Abd al-Mumin, Berber from Algeria, conquered the northern part of Algeria, Libya up to the borders of Egypt. His grandson Yaqub al-Mansur conquered Spain, softening the religious radicalism of his predecessors and continuing the intellectual and architectural greatness of the Almoravids. One of the sons of Abd al-Mumin is described by an Arab poet who saw him as a black-skinned man. Al-Mansur's mother is described as a negress, and Yaqub al-Mansur himself as a brown-skinned man. Therefore, it is exclusively blacks who form the origin of the Almohad dynasty. Architectural treasures of the Almohad kings in Morocco. The black founders of the Alawite dynasty from 1664 to the present day. Before the rule of the Alawites, who currently rule Morocco, ruled the Maronids and the Saadis or Saadians, who are Berber dynasties. These dynasties contributed a great deal intellectually and architecturally to Morocco. In addition, they apparently experienced the bleaching of Morocco because the distinction between black and white already existed at the birth of the Alawite dynasty. Authentic representation of Mulai Rashid, the founder of the Alawite dynasty, which ruled Morocco to this day. It was unmistakably black. As for the Alawite dynasty, it was founded by Mulai Rashid, a man from an Arabized tribe of Morocco. Records show that there is an authentic picture or portrait of the man who is perfectly a Negroid. Therefore, it is a black-skinned man who actually founded the Moroccan royal dynasty to which King Mohammed VI heard Mulai Rashid's brother, born to an enslaved black woman as Mulai Ismail. Mulai Ismail is considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, kings in the history of Morocco. He is a direct ancestor of the current Moroccan king. At 55, Mulai Ismail's reign was the longest in history. He was a fierce warrior and conqueror supported by 150,000 enslaved blacks, said Abid al-Bukhari, whom he bought and kidnapped and made powerful. He trusted them. He was also a builder, thanks to his 25,000 enslaved Europeans. Historians even speak of the racial solidarity between the king and his black warriors, which leads us to believe that Morocco has already turned white by this point. The king was also under the influence of his first wife, Laila Risha, who called the Empress of Morocco, who was described by French religious as black, ugly, and cruel, authoritarian, vicious. After the king's death, his sons fought over the throne amid succession conflicts. Everything was orchestrated by black slaves who were definitely put down. At the end of the 18th century, it was the semi-caste, and with the flow of white slaves, the whites, who would rule this country to this day. Mulai Ismail's mausoleum in Meknes, built during his lifetime. What can we conclude from this? Authentic representation of General Massa, who did a lot for Mulai Ismail victories. We can clearly see that the blacks ushered in the Moroccan imperial era and founded at least 3 of the 6 Moroccan royal dynasties. They brought Morocco to its political greatness through the Almoravid and Almohad dynasties. Moreover, they were undoubtedly present within the 3 other dynasties. Sheikh Anta Diop used the Sahara as a distinctive dividing line between the so-called Black Africa and the Maghreb, which at that time was supposed to be white. We now know that this barrier has to disappear. There was a racial continuity from both sides of the Sahara, but a cultural discontinuity between the sub-Saharans that remained some of the most authentic African on a cultural level and the first Berbers who were heavily Arabized. Everything is not perfect about these glorious ancestors who actively participated in the Arab black slave trade and who, in collaboration with the Arabs, enslaved the whites and produced wealth. Behavior incompatible with black culture, which is totally condemnable and which is due to the Arab pollution. Whatever the case, since the whites of the Maghreb do not want their black ancestors, the blacks of Africa must accept them as part of their heritage. All of this shows the overwhelming contribution of blacks to the civilizations of North Africa. So we are at the beginning of the vitalistic civilizations, animists of ancient Egypt and Carthage, which were exclusively black. The Moorish civilization in Spain and Imperial Morocco, although benefiting from the contributions of the Arabs, are also black civilizations. It is the real truth. fake representation of Mullah Ismail. How is it that a man with a paternal brother and mother who were both black would look like this? He was described by a French priest as a man almost black with a white spot on his face. P.S. Since writing this article, we have been able to update the black characteristics of the Saadian dynasty 1554-1660 that took power during the Spanish and Portuguese occupation of Morocco. The founder was Muhammad as a sheikh. His son and fourth king, Abd al-Malik, was described by the Portuguese Luis de Exeter as a man with a flat and short nose, with plump lips, a grey complexion, which we must consider as another shade of dark black skin. Another son of the founder was Mullah Muhammad's father, who is referred to by the Portuguese as barbaric Moor, cursed Moor, unfaithful Moor, black in appearance and bloodthirsty in his deeds. As we have already said several times, the term Moor means black in the language of the time. Mullah Muhammad's son was born to a Fulani mother after the Malian columnist Abderrahmane Saadi. Ahmad al-Masur, who was described as black by the Portuguese Fray Luis Nieto, is considered the father of modern Morocco because he drove Europeans from his area. It was he who destroyed the Songhai Empire in 1591 and ended the 1200-year glorious history of the Bantu in the Niger River. He had with his black wife Lala Juha, Zidan Abu Mali, and Mullah Abdullah Abu Faris, so both black kings. The sons of Zidan, at least half occupied, succeeded one another on the throne before the last king, Ahmad el-Abbas, about whom he had no information. Hence the Saadian dynasty was almost entirely black.